2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we are live.
Good afternoon. Welcome to a Greys of Westminster Friday live stream.
Hello.
We have our very special guest today, Ricci.
Hope you're doing well.
I said the very special guest. He's the only special guest that we have.
Yeah. If you've been on Ricci Watch this year, he's with us today.
I've arrived. I've appeared.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You basically just locked me in that cupboard over there.
It only comes out for special occasions. Now, today's special occasion is this lens that's been announced on Wednesday this week. So it's a 600 Z TCVR S lens.
Very nice. Now, the first thing I will say is that the weight surprised me. It's much lighter than you would think. I mean, it's what, 3.5 kilos? Not quite.
Yeah, I mean, when both of you said that when you first picked it up, you're like, oh.
The hand goes up.
Yeah, it's light.
So that if I can quite happily hold that with one hand, then that just gives you an idea. We're going to talk about this lens, so please feel free to send your questions over if you have them. Hopefully you can hear me okay. We're sharing a mic, as you can see.
Yeah. So
we're all friends here.
We're going to whisper.
But we are also going to answer your questions about firmware updates and what Ricci's been up to and all kinds of things. So anyway, pop your questions in. I will try and keep an eye out. Hello to everyone who has joined us so far. Yeah. Seth is here.
Seth is saying,
hey, Seth.
Acknowledge me.
So me and Seth have like a secret relationship where I basically love Seth and he hates me.
Oh, I see. That's it.
I thought I was the only one.
He said, exactly how long have you been growing that beard?
This I shaved yesterday.
I don't have that much patience. Like, it goes a little bit stubby and I'm like, it's time to shave.
That's it. I don't have that problem, so I'm okay. So we've already got questions coming in.
Put QQQ at the front of the question. It just helps us to sort the questions out from the whole chat.
Exactly. We're going to also, I think, briefly talk about the MCN10 because there is...
Sure. Surprisingly, I haven't actually seen one.
Okay.
So
it's not in the country?
Yeah, I've seen like obviously pictures and stuff from it, but I've not physically seen one. So I got a 600 instead. So,
I think it's a fair...
Yeah, I would prefer 600 myself.
So the 600, someone was asking about pre-orders. You can, when it comes to Greys, you can put your pre-order deposit down, which is asking for 5%, because obviously it's a very, very expensive lens, so none of this 10 or 20% business. That's a firm pre-order for us, so you can do that through our website. And then when they come in, or when yours comes in, we'll give you a call and sort out the balance. But that's the easiest way for us to do it, so you can do that now. Delivery is supposed to start on the 24th of November in the UK. Fingers crossed. Yeah,
we would advise with the current situation with 400mm, which is kind of dripping in very small, tiny quantities. It may happen to this lens. We may get a bunch of them, but kind of expectations that will be asked for. So don't expect that that we get a light shipment on the first day. So expect to wait a little bit.
Yes, I think.
Or a lot.
A lot. Yeah. We might get loads, but anyway, we tell you to be patient, as with all things.
Speaking of stocks, Ricci is not in charge of stocks, so don't ask the question where is this and where is that. So he doesn't know.
There we go. So I guess first question. Well, not first question, but one of the many first questions is: does the 600mm have the same magnetic field medical warning as the 400 does?
For pacemakers.
So technically, because it's the same system, yes. But there was something that I saw that meant that this still has the same setup, but the warning isn't as important. But I don't know. I wouldn't like to quote that.
I wonder if it's because it's a silky swift voice coil motor.
Silky smooth.
It's basically because it's used as magnets. So
silky smooth.
Anyway.
You can call it whatever you like, but basically because it uses magnets, and then obviously Nikon are concerned about magnets interfering with other stuff. So, but the strength of that magnet means that you'd have to be holding it incredibly close to actually do anything. So.
Right.
But there is no warning on the Nikon website.
I think there might be. I'm not
okay.
Double checked.
Okay,
so
we'll double check.
I wouldn't want to say yes or no because I'm unsure.
I think. I mean, Albert said the warning is reduced to 5 centimeters.
That's what I think was the change that I was talking about.
Yeah, so much closer proximity than with the 400mm. Still means that if you are a pacemaker user, I would be cautious. But that's the information that we have, is just whatever's written there. Now Seth asks, how does the lens feel? We've already established it's very light. This is not too bad at all. I mean, add a Z9 and it probably becomes a little bit weighty.
Yeah, but then it kind of adds to the balance, I suppose. So then you're not.
Yeah, Yeah. So how does it feel when you add more, like another teleconverter?
There's not a massive difference, especially because the teleconverters don't weigh a lot themselves.
Yeah.
And even the 2 times doesn't really add a massive amount of distance. The 1.4 is not even noticeable, but the 2 times adds a tiny amount of distance. So the balance doesn't really change. So I'd say that you might notice it over like a whole day, but I don't think so. I don't think so.
And in terms of, because you've had it for, how long have you had it for? Just a little bit.
A few weeks, I'd like to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've had a little play and combined converters and seen, have you looked
Yeah.
at performance? And...
Yeah, so like as I kind of mentioned, it's the 1.4 that's built into this lens is designed for this lens. So like the 1.4 that's built into a different lens will be designed for that lens.
So it's a bespoke.
Yeah, and that means that the loss of quality doesn't really exist. It's negligible. All you see is that your lens just zooms in and the quality is still there. Obviously, when you're adding an actual external teleconverters work slightly differently because you have to work with so many different lenses. But because the lens that you start with is so sharp already, you're kind of still getting a really good end result. And I think, sharpness, detail, quality is always subjective. So it just comes down to what you want from your final result. But I felt like this performs equally as good as the 400-8 and the 800-6.3 with the 1.4. And then the 2 times, you will see that in lower light situations, you might start to have slower focusing. But in terms of quality, the level of sharpness and detail is still there. It's just you might lose some of the finer detail.
Interesting. That's kind of what I'd observed. We've used it with the 100-400 and the 70-200.
That's true.
And that was our kind of feeling was...
Yeah, I mean, and it always, lots of people think, the teleconverter is making a huge difference. But one of the things that I've seen that makes an even bigger difference, and this is like photography in general, is the amount of light that you have just makes a way more difference as to whether you're using a teleconverter or not. Yeah. So if it's a really bright day, you're going to get fantastic results from a teleconverter. If it's overcast, you're not necessarily going to get the sharpest results. You're going to be at a higher ISO anyway. So there's other things at play rather than just the outright teleconverter on its own.
Right, which would be the case if you didn't have the teleconverter as well. Yeah, we've definitely seen that.
But I'm also thinking it also gives you so it's 1.4 is 840, and then you get 2 times teleconverter, so it's like 1680, and then you can also add DX crop on top. So that's a lot of magnification. But since we're talking about 800mm as well, so this is effectively 2-in-1 lens.
Yeah, for sure.
So you got 600 at a 4, you got 840 at 5.6. Now, what would you say for people?
6.3.
6.3. No, this is 5.6, right? With 1.4 teleconverter.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said 800.
Yeah, so now we're going to talk about 800 6.3.
I was preempting your question.
Exactly. And the question is, obviously, for people who are considering 800 6.3, and obviously 600 came out, do you need to have both, or you can just get one of those, obviously, at a lot more money, and then you don't really need 800 if you buy one of those?
So, I mean, if the cost isn't a problem, you don't need both.
Money is involved.
6 in here, another 6 in there, 22K.
So if you're in a situation where you can pick and choose, where you're like, oh, should I buy the 800-6.3 or should I buy this? This is the better lens. But I also appreciate that it's a lot more expensive.
Yeah, at a price.
The fact that it's not just over 800, it's an 840, and it also then is a 5.6 versus a 6.3. They're 2 completely different lenses. But what I would say is that when you put the 800 next to this lens, it does kind of remind you how small the 800 is. That was kind of my biggest shock, is when I put them side by side, I was like, oh, that 800 is actually a lot smaller than I thought it was compared to this 600. So it's a tough call choosing between those lenses. I think if like you said, money is no object, this is the lens you would buy. Okay. That's kind of a no-brainer. But
so if you're looking for, you're only going to buy a telephoto lens once in your lifetime. Yeah. Now that you've got your Z system, would you say this or the 400 2.8? Because that's another.
I think it'll purely come down to your subject, and especially one of the things I like to say is if you're spending this much, you probably know what you're going to use it for. I might be wrong, but...
well, yeah, my car costs less than this.
Well, for sure. So like the way I generally try and explain it is, if you know that you want a 400-8 because you like the idea of the 400mm focal length, and you're using this at distances of, I don't know, for like mammals and stuff, where a 400 or 500 is perfect, then the 400-8 is the lens. Yeah. If you're in a situation where you like photographing smaller subjects, small birds, greater distances, then all of a sudden I would say the 600, because it's a 600 and an 800, is the better lens. It's not like you can just compare them on a spec sheet. It will purely come down to your subject and your use case. If you prefer a smaller subject in their environment, 400. If you want close in, tighter shots, 600. There's, there'll be some people that will buy both. But there's
Lucky you.
There's going to be a situation.
Can I be your assistant?
There'll be a situation where if you know what you're going to photograph more often, like one of the things I always do if I'm ever unsure about what lens I want to use most or what lens I do use most,
You buy them all.
I'll look back at the pictures I've taken. So like I used to do this quite a long time ago with a 200 to 500. How often did I use a 200 to 500 at 200 or at 500? Transpired, I used it at 500 all the time.
Right.
So it makes sense for me to go to like a 500 PF. So the same thing applies to this. If you have a 400, let's say like a 100 to 400, and use it at 400 all the time, makes sense that you quite like the 400 focal length. But if you constantly feel like a 100 to 400 is too short, maybe you need a 6.
Yeah. So it's all about use case, really, is what you're saying.
Like overall quality is like between them is the same.
Yeah.
It just purely comes down to your use case and what you're going to be using them for.
And everything that seems to come off the line at the moment is amazing. So
Sure.
I haven't seen anything where a new lens has come out and people have gone, oh, I'm actually really disappointed with the sharpness or the quality. It tends to be that all of the new lenses are very, very good at what they do.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is that Nikon spends an awful lot of time, more than I think people would ever realize, really figuring out what a lens is going to be used for and how they're going to make that lens be the best that it can be. And obviously there's some lenses where the main priority is price.
Yeah.
And then there's some lenses like this one where the main priority is, doesn't matter how much it costs, it needs to be the fastest, the sharpest, it just needs to be the best it can be. So they do put a lot of effort into that to make sure that the lenses that they do make are good for what they're designed for. Obviously, if you buy a lens for £200, it's not going to be the same as something like this.
No.
So what you're saying is it's not as good as 28 and 40 pancake.
I love the 28mm and the 40mm pancake.
They have its place,
Yeah.
absolutely.
They do have their place. I'd say Vahan is in the chat, as
Hello,
is Chuck
Vahan.
from AP
Hello,
Studios.
Chuck.
Hello. We like we have our channels. We all support each other, and then they come and
Good.
join us. So it's great. Everyone is very happy to see you. The comments are coming thick and fast. So just the general consensus is they're happy to see you. There are a couple of questions about whether or not this was the lens that you took to go and see Morton. I think we've established. Was this a lens that was in the video?
This physical, yes.
It was this one.
Yes, that lens has been with me since it arrived.
It's been places.
Yeah.
And so it went all the way to Norway. Morton has held this lens.
So
gonna
it's
rub my
worth more
hands
now.
Yeah.
Wash them.
That's great. Now, there was a question. Oh, my goodness. Vahan said, even trade at Gray's, my 58 knocked and my 600 FLE for the new 600 TC. I don't know if I can answer that, Vahan. I'm sorry. I have no idea whether or not you'd be able to trade a 600 FL and 58 knocked for a 600 TC.
Okay.
Maybe.
Is this one better than the 600 F mount?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The biggest thing that I was really shocked about, because I expected it to be better from a picture quality point of view. Right? That was kind of an expectation of new lenses, even though, don't get me wrong, the 600 FL is it's a special lens to me. But the biggest thing I was shocked about is focus speed.
Interesting.
But also different design and also much lighter. But we were talking about some other brands just shoehorning different mounts on the same existing design. This is completely new lens.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
From ground up.
This is a Z mount lens. It's been designed to have the teleconverter in there. Everything else in front of the teleconverter is also a whole new design. Yeah, it doesn't have an FTZ adapter on the back, if that makes sense. So, no.
Yeah. So there's
Other brands.
there's that element. Yes, Nikhil, you can do, for anyone who is seriously considering this lens, we do finance. We are a broker, not a lender. I have to say that. but
yeah.
You can do installments. There's all kinds of ways to pay for things. We make it very easy for you to spend money.
Yeah, that's true. But assess your financial situation first, okay?
Yeah.
Don't go deep in the debt yet. So,
Not financial advice.
Not financial, because I'm like this, and then I cry for years.
David from Synthetic Color asked, is the gold ring here to stay, or will it only be for high-end tellies going forward? So as you can see on this one, we've got our lovely gold ring. Obviously, with the nameplate plate is in chrome. Is that just a pre-production?
It's in
thing,
titanium.
or-
No, that's a production thing.
That's a
So that's also the same on the 400-2.8.
What's
yeah, that's how it's.
what's that second ring? I know it was on 400 mil as well.
Yeah. So this ring is basically the same as what you have on every other Z mount lens. So like like
That's a function ring.
the ring that's on like the 24-70,
Yeah.
14-24-2.8, all those types of things.
So you can assign aperture, or you can say some other settings to that ring.
Yeah, so if there's also things like exposure and ISO and such. I know that someone really wants to add white balance to this ring, but unfortunately you can't do that right now.
Really weird. I never thought. I mean, great if that's what you want to do.
But this ring will go all the way around.
Yeah.
And it doesn't click, it doesn't make any noise, whereas this ring does not. So this is basically a shift one way and a shift the other.
And what does it do?
So it does. There are actually a couple of different things you can choose for this ring, but my favorite use case is I use this with memory set. So you can basically use it so that if you flick it to the right, it goes to a distant subject, and if you flick it to the left, it can go back to a different
nice.
subject. And you can switch them around, but to me, to the right is further away, and to the left is closer.
Right.
So that you can basically, I was sat in a hide with Morton, close focus, and then all of a sudden there's a subject in the background. I just flick that ring and it goes back to my memory set position.
That's very cool.
But there's lots of other stuff you can assign it to as well. But you will only see that on this lens and the 400 2.8 currently.
Right. Okay. So,
Even the 800 doesn't have that.
no, that's true because the 800. I remember that from the 800. It has it has buttons.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have
doesn't
this
have this
extra
extra
little
ring, no.
And because we've only seen a 400 2.8 once
Yeah.
in the presence of Ricci at the Velodrome, I didn't remember that it had this ring.
Well,
actually.
800 doesn't cost that much, so that's another thing.
The thing I really like is that they all have different textures.
Yeah, so you can kind of, even if you're in a dimly lit situation,
So you know which one's which.
True.
out.
Yeah. And
That's
it's
clever.
the same distance and texture as it is on the 400 2.8.
Right.
So if you do have both, then they're basically the identical from a handling point of view when it comes to dials.
And in terms of the foot, Andy was actually someone who asked me this question, but the feet, are they the same on the 400 and the 600?
Same on the 400, the 600, and the 800.
Oh, okay. So interchangeable.
Do you know why people always say, "Oh, I need to get additional, foot for Nikon lenses"? Like, where's this camera? It's just because they want to have Arca Swiss on it.
Yeah,
or-
everyone wants
okay,
an Arca. Yeah,
it's
I'm well
always,
aware
yeah.
that everyone wants an Arca Swiss foot.
Everybody.
Unfortunately, it's just not one of those things that Nikon have decided to do. I couldn't give you an answer as to why. It's the way that it is. But I do actually quite like the little pad that they've added to this foot. It's the same on the 400 and the 800. It just makes it comfortable to hold for longer periods of time. But at the end of the day, you can swap it out for a different foot if you want to.
Does it come with 2 feet like some other lenses with a shorter and longer one? No, just one. Okay.
Just one. Well, at least the lens I have has got just one. And my production 428 only comes with one, so it'd just be 1 foot.
There you go. I have to say a big thank you to Jeremy and to Studio Rene for your contribution to the coffee fund,
Which is open.
/ cold beverage, because Rishi's not a coffee drinker. That's okay.
We need some likes as well, I
And we
think.
need some, I was going to say, and please like, and if you're not a subscriber, then you should.
If you like this video, I might make some more videos.
Ricci has spoken.
So please make sure you are liking the stream. It also means that when other people are just casually browsing YouTube, the stream will come up. And then, I mean, we've had people turn up on this stream. Sometimes we're like, oh, I was actually here looking at videos to do with Canon or Sony, and then your live stream turned up. Why aren't you talking about either of those brands?
and now I'm subscribed. I'm watching your 50th video, and I like it.
But we definitely do try and cater for all tastes, although we're obviously primarily Nikon and can't really talk about other brands very much. There was a question about Canon. They just released an R6 II, was it, Mark II?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does Nikon think about it?
Does Nikon think about it at all?
No, I mean, I think it's a really important point because, obviously other brands are aware of what other brands are doing, right?
Yeah.
A camera launcher's, another brand knows that a camera launcher is great. But if you think for 1 second that like a camera brand has launched a camera and therefore the other camera brand then needs to launch a camera like in the next couple of months and they react to something because of what brand A's done, that's not how it works.
Well, remember when A1 was announced and then Z9 was announced and people said, oh, Nikon reacted to A1, and that's why they changed their specs in 3 months. It doesn't happen. Those things take time. They normally have specs at least maybe a year in advance or even more.
Sure.
Yeah.
There you go. Seth has actually just shot with that new Canon, so there we go. He gets all the goodies in advance.
Well, ask Seth in the chat, how's it?
Yeah, exactly. If you're interested, then you can ask Seth. He's a man in the know and has his own channel, so you can even subscribe to that. So he says, actually, just shot that R6 II yesterday. They finally did what Nikon did and allow you to swap eyes and faces on the fly when focusing face detection. There you go.
So people are copying us now.
Exactly.
It's interesting, yeah, because it was always things like, oh, Nikon is late to the game, and now they have to catch up. But obviously Z9 kind of disproved that. I mean, obviously before maybe, but like now we see that actually Z9 is probably the best camera right now. I mean, only technically A1 can compete with it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's, I mean, on the internet, there's obviously the idea that something's late.
Yeah. Well, we in that space. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
That's why we're asking you questions. You see, like some questions we want to ask you personally are very different from the question we ask you from the internet, because internet is a lot more extreme in its reaction in a way.
Sure.
You know? So that's why we're asking those questions.
But I think, I think things arrive when they arrive, and technology is continuously moving on. So it's not like, if you launch something at a particular point, then, if it would have launched it 6 months sooner, would it have been the same product? I'm unsure.
Yeah.
Things take time, and things arrive at the right time for how long it took to get the product to where it needed to be.
And obviously we're talking, let's say, about sensors. Obviously, even development of the sensor takes years to come into fruition. It's not like they can just turn out the sensor every 6 months and it's completely new with different megapixels and different performance.
No, absolutely. We're not in a situation where technology changes every 6 months. There are obviously different sensors out there and things like that, but if you think that a camera can be changed drastically within 6 months, it's not really going to happen.
It's not how it works. I have to say thank you to Terry and to Fred for your contributions to the
Thank you
Coffee
very
Fund.
much.
Fred said, great to see you all with the new lens. Wow, I'm still waiting almost a year for my Z 800mm. Yes. Fred's in Florida, so actually not a UK supply situation. But
hopefully it's a little bit better.
yeah, hopefully it's a little bit better over there. But 800mm, yes, they have been few and far between.
I've seen quite a few people that I know that have got their 800s in the UK. I can't comment on the US. But...
No. And it seems to really vary in terms of distribution and where things go. We are now in a position where we are getting imminently the Z9s that we need to fulfill all of our prepaid orders. Yay!
That's cool.
Which means that very, very soon, if you were to buy a Z9, you wouldn't have to wait quite so long. You might have to wait a couple of weeks instead of like 6 months. so that's good. But stock is definitely improving. But different products have kind of different supply chains, and how they end up where they end up is a mystery to all of us, I think. Ricci doesn't have anything to do with the supply, so I can't ask him if he's got a few 800mm hiding under the desk.
I do not. No, unfortunately not.
I don't know what supply is. I get things 2 months in advance. They announced,
What supply?
Yeah. They just arrived.
Exactly. It's
good to be humble. Yeah.
That's great. So now on the MC N10, please feel free to put more questions about the 600mm if you have them. But I'm going to move on to other topics. Otherwise,
So you haven't seen the MT?
Not physically,
but
no.
Explain us, not videographers.
Sure.
Who is it for? What does it do?
You don't necessarily just have to use it for video.
Okay.
You can use it for other stuff if you wanted to.
Okay.
Right.
So what would be the regular use case for this type
Just think of it
accessory?
as a cabled remote.
Okay.
But it has all your buttons on. Your function buttons, it has all of your controls, everything. Granted, its main use case is video, because you then attach it to the side of a gimbal, or you attach it to the side of a cage or a rig or whatever it is, right? And that can give you better purchase, especially if you're using a gimbal that's kind of like a run and gun style thing. But there are also other use cases where, as long as you just cable it, you could use it as just a remote if you wanted to.
So what you're saying is, let's say, imagine you on the gimbal. So normally, record button, normally those gimbals can do. So you press record on the gimbal, it records. But if you need to change things on the camera, you have to go this way. Yes. And then you hold in the gimbal. It's not easy to change settings on the camera while holding the gimbal. So you have to really put it down. So having that thing on the side with all the buttons available to you, will definitely, be a lot more convenient to use.
It's much more useful. I mean, that's something we experience all the time because we're a two-person camera video band, and if you've got to change settings on the fly, then it's like, okay, stop, let's put the gimbal down, it's a pain. Is there, do you think, any idea that might then be compatible with earlier cameras? Because obviously we use the Z6 for most of our filming, or Z6
I think they added support in for Z6 II
for Z6
and Z7 II. I might be wrong on that, but I'm sure their latest update added support.
Yeah, I thought I'd read that too, but then the product wasn't out yet, so I wasn't sure if it was. Anyway, so there we go.
Yeah.
Because someone did ask that question, whether or not it would be compatible with the Z6 and the Z7. Z6 is obviously the one that people usually use for video. Or Z6 II, as opposed to the Z7 and Z7 II. So Andy asks, is it possible to jam power supply to the MCN10 and Z9, or just rely on the ENL 18D? I don't know if you haven't seen one. Do you know?
The MCN10 will take AA's.
Okay.
So it has got, in the bottom of the grip is AA batteries.
Right.
They'll run for an incredibly long period of time because the grip itself doesn't really draw that much power, obviously. It's just like a remote.
Can it be run without batteries, but by using the camera battery?
So you would still want to have batteries in it.
Okay.
But so the USB-C connection is for data, obviously, of you pushing buttons, and then the batteries will just power the grip.
But does the USB cable supply power as well?
Not
as the
that I'm
data?
aware of.
Okay.
No.
Sam, hello Sam, welcome back.
Sam.
Haven't seen you for a while. Said, I saw pics of that grip a long time ago. Is it actually a new one, or have they finally released it? No, we did see the development announcement. Didn't we? Not long after the Z9 came out, I think.
No, so there was, they did a development announcement basically saying we're making this, and then obviously it's taken them a while to get it to where it needs to be, to get it to market, and obviously now it's been officially released, so price, pre-orders, all that type of stuff.
And in terms of cable, because Marvin asks what the longest cable is that you could use with it, is there a kind of standard cable, or is it proprietary?
So it's USB-C.
Okay.
But there is obviously, when you get to really long lengths, you'll start to need powered cables.
Yeah.
But yes, not like a normal 3-meter USB cable would be fine.
Right.
But it is USB-C.
And Studio Rosenfors asked if it would be compatible with the first gen Z6 and Z7.
I'm unsure.
I don't think it works with the Z6 at this moment in time. Perhaps when the product is out and in the wild and Nikon see a demand for it, they might be able to add compatibility.
It feels like a firmware update personally, but obviously you know a lot more.
Yeah, no, I mean, it'd be something I'd love to try. I just need to get hold of one. So
True.
As soon as I can get one. There is one in the UK.
Well, good.
Yeah.
So it's making the rounds.
Yeah.
Someone's got it.
Yeah.
So Nikhil asked if, and actually this is a really good question because obviously Ricci runs workshops for Nikon School and online courses and travels all over the place for Nikon School. What is it? North Europe. Is that
Nikon Northern Europe.
Nikon Northern
Yeah.
Europe. So he says, can we sign up for a Nikon School expedition and try out this lens?
Yeah, we absolutely do that. It does depend on where we're going and what we can take. But let's say, for example, if someone wants to book one of our courses, they can request lenses for us to bring. That isn't necessarily a always guarantee, but generally if you give us enough notice, we can get hold of something, bring it along, you can test it out. So like for a lot of our wildlife courses, we'll take a lot of lenses that we know that people would be interested in anyway, but then we also have people request lenses to use for the day. If there's only a particular, let's say there's only one of one lens, you might not be able to use it for the whole day because we have to share it with other people. But it doesn't cost you anything extra other than obviously the price of the course, right? So, but if it's a lens that's been out for a while, let's say if you wanted to use like a 100 to 400, I think we have quite a few of 100 to 400s. We have quite a few 400, 4.5s. So yeah, we are more than happy for people to request specific kit. Like for our landscape stuff, people request 1424 2.8s, 14 to 30, all that type of stuff.
So people who want to sign up for the course expedition, what do they do? Where do they go?
Sure. So there's lots of different Nikon School websites. So yeah, because there's loads of obviously different Nikon schools in different regions, but there's not quite any like the UK.
Yeah. Which one is yours?
So if you can either go to Nikon UK's website and then there'll be Nikon School links from Nikon UK's website, or you can just Google Nikon School UK and Nikon School UK's website will come up, not to be confused with other Nikon schools in different areas.
Yeah.
I don't do any other work for them. So just Nikon School UK.
Just Nikon School UK. I don't know what the other Nikon schools are like, but I do feel like
There's quite a few.
You, Neil, you've got another team member now, don't you?
Not quite yet.
Okay, so you and Neil are still the
Yeah. We're the core. We're the core of the Nikon School UK. We are the only 2 trainers in Nikon School UK. So a lot of the time, people think that Nikon School is like this massive.
It's a university in Cambridge.
Yeah, no. There's only 2 of us. So everything that happens in the
Hogwarts.
UK and now like Northern Europe is covered by me and Neil, and that's it.
Wow.
2-man band.
Yeah.
Just like us.
Just like us. And I mean, I know that you're both so busy, crazy busy and traveling. This is why we have Ricci watch, because it's like, where is Ricci now?
Where am I next? Yeah.
And it's always in various different rather exotic places. Where have you been most recently that you can tell us
Yeah,
about?
what have you been up to?
Yeah. The key word there is that I can tell you about.
So let's keep the Z8 stuff. So let's just,
The most recent is Norway, because that was only literally a couple of weeks ago. And that was obviously to meet Morten, which was really exciting. It was quite weird, actually, because I'd never been to Norway before. And then it just transpired that I was in Oslo like a couple of months ago. And then I flew back to Oslo. So it's like I just visit all these places that I've never visited before, and then I visit them loads.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'd be Norway. Before that, where was I? I'm trying to take the places out.
I know you were doing some landscape stuff. Is that quite close to home? Was that UK based that you were doing?
Yeah, it's like a lot of our landscape courses are either in the UK. We are starting to do more and more stuff that's in Northern Europe. We quite famously do a lot of stuff in Iceland.
Yes.
So
One day I want to come with you to
I
Iceland.
think
maybe in March, not now. It's a bit chilly in
cold
there.
now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where Neil is now. So Neil's in Scotland, doing our Scotland workshop. But the one that you're probably talking about is when I was in Devon. So we'd run a course in Devon where we run it in the summer for astrophotography, and then we run it kind of like October time for sunrise and sunsets. But yeah, we do lots of different stuff.
Nice.
So you mentioned Morten Himmler, and Vahan asked a question: how's it hanging out with Morten? Is he? He's a cool dude, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
the biggest advantage is that we get on really well.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong, he's an incredible guy that does and visits some incredible things. But actually, I think we get on really well, and we kind of complement each other because I'm a very technical person, and I love the technical ins and outs of how things work. Whereas he's very much a storyteller. Yeah. And
does he know how to put the lens on the camera?
He does.
So,
yeah.
That's a good start.
I'm not going to take anything away from his photography. His photography is fantastic, but he's very much a storyteller. He's always thinking about, what's the story side of this, and what's the aspect that I can show people where I am, what I'm doing.
I love that.
And where I'm always thinking about how can I tell someone how this works.
Yeah.
Was there a moment where he's taking a picture and you're like, can I change the setting?
There was a couple of situations where I was like, well, maybe if we tried this. But no, I think the biggest thing is that we know what each other's strengths are, and I'm super excited about doing some more stuff with him in the future. I think it's a kind of a surprise that like the first time I met him, I was like, this is gonna be so cool. Yeah. And then we've kind of grown from there. So yeah.
Oh, it's so lovely.
Nice.
And it's nice when you're working with someone that you, as you say, each other's strengths and weaknesses, or or more strengths than anything else, and you can kind of go, okay, so you can be in charge of this bit, and then I will dovetail into that by fitting these things. It's absolutely great. So there are more Morten.
I hope so. Yeah. Who knows?
I was just thinking about our strengths and weaknesses, and obviously my my strengths is Photoshop skills, and obviously the cover for this live stream tells you all about that. And Becky approving that tells you all about that as well.
That's all you need to know.
And Ricci being happy with it as well.
Ricci just letting us just get away with being a little bit cheeky. Cave Droid said, can't take my eyes off that lens. That's why I've put it right here in front.
I was a little bit concerned it was going to fall over, so I'm just going to put it that way.
That's fair.
That's why it's not next to me. It's between Becky and Ricci.
That's why I put it here, because we're not. We can gesticulate, but we don't kind of shove things off the table.
You don't do it full on Italian,
That's right. I was showing off the gold band, that's why, but you can still just about see it in the frame. There's a question, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this honestly, but Roman asks, why is it not possible in the Z9 to choose half stops for ISO setting, and 1 and 3rd steps are possible? I'm trying to make that sound English.
Didn't we add?
I thought that you
But I think that's video only.
Oh.
So we added extra stops. I'm pretty sure that's for video only. That's probably why.
Yeah.
There's probably no reason other than it's just a firmware thing at the moment.
So it could be possible.
It could be possible.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure we added that for video only.
Oh.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about Z9, Andy, can you just repeat that question from the earlier? Unfortunately, the chat just disappeared and I can't see that question, but I promise you that we're going to answer that.
It's so active,
Yeah.
Which is great. And we love all your questions. So thank you for sending those over. But yes, when there's a lot of them, we can't always keep an eye on them. Is there a Ricci equivalent in the US, North America region?
I'm not sure. If anyone from the US is watching, I'd quite like to move to the US.
So as opposed to cloning you and having another Ricci,
I mean, there is Nikon School in the US.
Yeah.
But I think they work a lot more with photographers rather than having like a dedicated person.
Yeah.
So like in the UK, we obviously have me and Neil, and we do a lot of our training. We still do work with photographers.
Yeah.
But we're there 5 days a week. You know, I wake up in the morning. It's Nikon School. It's like we're there answering questions. We're running courses. That's what we do.
Yeah.
So I'm not unsure how that works in every other area. So because every other area is different.
Yeah.
Like France, Germany, they do things slightly differently.
Thing,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Everyone has their own slight difference. There's not like a universal pattern for Nikon School. But if anyone from the US wants me to move to the US,
then you know where to find them. Someone was saying, is it okay to put the lens this way around? Because Hasselblad don't recommend putting element down. I've always put it mount way down, but it's just...
one of the things I'd be aware of is I probably wouldn't travel with it like this without obviously the front cap on it. But the front ring is rubberized.
Yeah.
So this is like a soft rubber that's designed to be put down onto surfaces. And
is the front element also like a filter? I mean,
removable
front bit.
I mean, I wouldn't want to damage it.
So do it on purpose.
Don't put it on the spike.
But yeah, it's basically designed to be a little bit better at dealing with fingerprints, dust, water, and so on, right? So it's coated specifically for that.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't go as far as to say that you could treat it like a UV filter.
No. Sure, you can't just scratch it, take it off and throw it away.
It is easier to get to and replace if it needs to be replaced versus like something that's in the lens.
Well, we have a lot of people who are saying you'd be more than welcome to move to the US. I mean, they're not from Nikon USA, but they are.
Yeah,
just
that's the problem.
live next to Seth, you know, you're going to hang out all the
Seth
time.
is very desperate for me to move to New York.
I don't know. I've had two of you in New York. Between you and Seth, it'd be like, New York, watch out, right? So Andy's reposted his question.
Yes, so are you ready for the serious question?
Sure.
Be prepared.
Okay.
They're my favourite.
So, QQQ. So autofocus and 3D autofocus tracking. If you actually understand what has changed and what these changes were intended to do, the supplement
guide
is not helpful.
Supplementary
Now,
guide.
there's few things with that. So people were reporting bugs and people had issues with hybrid autofocus, etc., etc. So could you just make it, simplify it to the folks?
Yes. So I suppose the first thing that's worth mentioning is Nikon's aware of the bug that happens if you are, let's say, if you're in auto area and then you jump to like 3D from a function button. So Nikon are happy to say that they'll fix that in a future firmware update. There is a little bit of a temporary fix. I appreciate it's not as thorough as an actual firmware update to fix that issue, but the temporary fix is it can be caused by settings that carry over. So it can be caused if you're loading in your older settings before you updated, or it can also be caused or fixed by you doing like a factory reset. So if you factory reset and then after you've updated and then load your settings back in, that should fix some of those problems. But in some cases that doesn't work.
So one thing that we had that Simon Stafford actually brought up to me the other day was that a fix for the My Menu bug, which is a very, very specific thing. Not everybody uses My Menu, but for those of you that do, is if you are going to do the Z9 firmware update, just keep record of your My Menu settings, manually delete them all out before you do the firmware update, rather than doing a save load settings, including the My Menu bit, because the My Menu bit, when you then load your saved settings, is still going to go a bit squiffy.
So basically, camera won't know where those settings are located because the menu structure has changed a little bit from what I understood.
Yeah, that was what That's what I understood. You could confirm or deny
Without
that.
going too deep into that.
I just
but
deny
yeah.
everything.
Yeah,
I know
very
you're
simplifying
wrong.
things there. Yeah.
So anyway, so hopefully that helps. Now the thing is that there are some things where people will say, oh, it's a bug, when actually it's just it wasn't designed to be used that way, and other people will say it's a bug for everything. So,
Yeah, I mean there is definitely I mean user error exists, right? But
everyone's perfect.
no, user error exists, but at the same time and because of the nature of the job that I do, I always try and figure out how or why somebody wants something to work the way that they do. So rather than telling somebody, oh, that's not how you do it, I'd much rather try and figure out why they're trying to do it that way, and then say, well, okay, that doesn't quite work. So let's see if we can try and do maybe this or maybe change that. So I am aware that there are some setups that might sound great, and all of a sudden you're doing all these really cool things with autofocus, but actually you probably could have just stayed in one mode.
Right.
So I think there's a little bit of overcomplication. What's the word?
Overcomplication?
The overcomplication. Yeah. I was going to say oversimplification, but it's the exact opposite.
It's the definite opposite of what's going on. Yeah, absolutely. Someone said that my voice doesn't sound. It's because I'm so far away from the microphone. I'm used to speaking into a mic like this.
Yeah, we're sharing one today.
Because I've got my own, I apologize.
It's totally fine. Should have brought another mic, really, would be the solution. Andy said same for button rolled settings. The names have changed. So yeah, anywhere where a firmware update has caused a name to change or a menu to change or anything like that,
Then the setting is not recognized.
That's right. So that's why the advice is my menu specifically, delete your, keep track and then delete your my menu. Then you can save your settings and load them and hope that it'll all work out fine. So we had a few questions, and this is unavoidable, really. Actually, I'm going to ask another question before that, because it was earlier and I meant to ask it. So these lenses don't actually come with anything in here. Now, the old long telephoto f-mount lenses obviously had a piece of glass. You had to have a filter in it. It was part of the optical design. If you didn't put a filter in it,
It's a nice monocle.
So is there any advice on putting a filter in here? Is it necessary?
A gel?
Yeah, so I suppose my first point of call is that it's not necessary.
Okay.
It's not something you have to have. The reason that it existed in previous lenses, you got it exactly right, is that filter was part of the actual lens itself. This filter doesn't interact with any other elements. So there's nothing that's like this side of the filter, if that makes sense. It's mainly there because if people want to use it for things like NDs or polarizers, that's what it's there for. Should you put a UV filter in it? No.
Not necessary.
No need.
But if you want to do those things and you want to add filters in, it's there. But I don't think for most people, I don't use one in there. So
Okay.
for most people, I don't think they would need to.
Fair enough. And with the polarizer, obviously it's a specific polarizer because you need that little gear on the outside
To
be able
rotate it.
Turn it. In terms of availability, is it the same as the 400 polarizer? Do you know?
Yes.
Okay, so CPL 405.
Yeah.
Yeah. Such nerds.
You love it.
And I'm glad they got rid of CPL 1L and CPL 3L.
Yeah, that was confused. I didn't. We knew what they were, but nobody else did. So CPL 405s are generally available. They are not cheap, but you can buy them if you need a polarizer for it. Because again, someone was asking that question.
Yeah, none of the accessories for long telephoto lenses are cheap, unfortunately.
No, especially the lens hoods.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. So now I'm going to ask the inevitable questions. There's a few people saying, is there going to be a like a D500 for the Z system? Is it going to be a Z8? I know that
it's a shame, guys. We don't have much time left, actually. I mean, we're gonna talk about this after
my
live
train
stream,
is in 5 minutes.
Gotta go, bye.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I mean, obviously you can't say what's coming, even if you knew what's coming. So we have to rephrase our
Exactly. Is it going to be a good next year for Nikon? Tell us that.
I think I suppose the biggest thing to say is that obviously a lot of manufacturers have launched a lot of stuff over the past couple of days, right? So there's a lot going on, and I appreciate that sometimes it might appear that if everyone else is doing something, but then someone else isn't doing something, you're like, oh, what's going on? Like there's
Nikon immediately announced
but
something.
I think we really need to stop thinking that manufacturers react to other manufacturers. That doesn't happen. Like Nikon announces cameras the same way that everybody else does. They announce a camera when it's ready, when they want to announce it. If that so happens to be at the time that you're ready to buy a camera, then that's convenient. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be times where, you know, Nikon might have launched the Z9 and you might have just bought a Z7 II.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to launch everything at the right time, but they'll launch stuff when it's ready. So I appreciate there's like lots of stuff going on, but
there's also a lot of people, obviously they've looked at the current range and every single individual photographer has decided that something is missing from the range.
Oh,
and
for
so
sure.
Where is the next Z5 II? Where is the next Z6 III? Where is the ZF? Where is the, you know, the list of potential cameras is obviously endless.
And I think, so like if we were having this conversation, at the start of the year, like the biggest thing that people were asking for at the start of the year, long lenses. And now people are asking for like other lenses. So it's like, it's a never ending request. There's always new lenses. Nikon are always trying to make new lenses. And it's the same thing with bodies. People always want new bodies. There's always, unlike phones, let's say, if you want the latest phone, then generally you're always stuck in that same upgrade cycle.
Yeah.
Because you're either in a contract or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But with cameras, they announce at different times. Everyone's in a slightly different upgrade cycle. Some people keep their cameras for longer, some people don't. So everyone's in a different position. So a camera might launch that's perfect for one person at the right time and they'll buy it straight away.
Yeah.
But actually it might launch and maybe someone will want to buy it 12 months later. But that means they're a little bit closer to the next camera that launches. And then all of a sudden they go, oh, I just bought this camera and now this camera's launched.
Yeah.
So there isn't a clear cut kind of upgrade cycle for photography. There never has been.
Yeah.
No.
Because some people just keep their cameras for years and some people want to upgrade their camera all the time. Whichever way you look at it, it just comes down to what do you need it for?
Yeah.
Rather than trying to chase the newest thing, if that
The
makes sense.
waterfalls. I think what Ricci's trying to say, and I'm you know, you're very polite, and I'm just kidding. It's not all about you. Like in general, like whoever you are, that's the idea. Obviously, they plan for things, and let's say we talk between us. Obviously, we're not wildlife users. We like, let's say for us, this year was quite empty. So because the long lenses don't appeal to us. But that's fine.
But for me, it's been incredibly exciting.
Exactly.
Like the 400-4.5, the 400-2.8, and this 600. Like I have every dream lens that I've ever wanted. Yeah. So,
and that's the point. That's the point. So you know, they plan things when they're going to come out, and maybe this year they release these certain things, then next year is going to be different things, etc., etc. But we just need to wait. It's not going to happen when you want it. You know, in general, they are scheduled and they're going to come out. You know, maybe it's camera for you, maybe it's not. You know, no, it's just on the internet. Everyone gets like, oh, I'm gonna switch tomorrow. You know, because Nikon, there's no Z90 for me or something. Oh, I'm gonna do this and that. And realistically speaking, I mean, let's be more down to earth and less dramatic and say, look. We'll be down. Exactly. We appreciate things will happen, and they will happen. And you can see the things they can release in, and that I think gives me a really good kind of, I wouldn't even say hope. It gives me a good impression that things that are going to come out next year are going to be really competitive with other brands, even if they don't compete with each other.
There you go. Con has spoken. Roman, we've already answered your question about the steps of ISO setting. So I'm not going to answer it again, but we did answer it, and the answer is hopefully it will be added in a firmware update. But Ricci does have a Z9, so he's going to look right now.
It's a video thing, so I'm just going to double check.
So there you go. Now, also, there was a question about there was a question about the 200 to 600, so I can't remember what it was, and there's lots of questions about the 200 to 600. Do you get asked that quite a lot? Do you get asked where it is? Because we do. Yeah. Every week we get asked. Yeah.
Bags of letters coming in every day.
The mail is
kind of similar to what we just spoke about. Like things come at the right time.
Yeah, exactly. But as far as you know, the roadmap is. I mean, the roadmap is what it is. They're not going to remove stuff.
No.
We as a kind of collective internet, we want everything yesterday. So it needs to be released. The date should be here already 6 months ago. Z90, etc., etc. But obviously, if you actually look at the releases for this year, I mean, it's been quite fruitful for Nikon. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I mean, we had release after release after release. And in terms of this, I mean, those things take time to develop. That's the thing.
Yeah, and I think as a few people were saying on the chat here, it's just Sorry.
No, I want Z8 as well.
Yes,
Let's
we all
say,
want Z8.
I want Z8. I want 85 too. That's the thing.
I think as a breed, photographers are infinitely impatient. But
Exactly.
It's actually
The one thing I'll say is that Nikon hasn't stopped making cameras.
Exactly, and there are things that are developing right now. So they're there, they're in pre-production. So they're going to happen in the right time.
That's right. Anyway, so moving on. For you, I mean, obviously there are lots of people saying, I want a Z8 and I want this and I want that. And that's fantastic. And we love your wish lists and we ask you often what you would like to see in cameras. What would be your ideal camera? Is the Z9 like perfect for you, or is there anything else that you would like, or another camera that you'd like to see?
No, I mean it's. I used to talk about, like, when people used to ask me this question, I always used to talk about how I love like high resolution, and I suppose my biggest problem is that because I shoot such a mixture of things, or because I had so much experience with so many different lenses, I know what lenses I really like, and I know what lenses I don't really like. Just because I don't like something doesn't mean it's not very good. It just doesn't appeal to my style of photography. So people find it quite strange that like I will shoot ultra wide and then I'll shoot super long. So I won't really have a use for like a 70 to 200.
Right.
I just don't use one. A great lens, but I just don't use one. And when it comes to cameras, like I love high resolution, I love detail, I love sharpness. But generally, it's not a case of, there's something missing from this that I really want. Like it does most things. There's lots of stuff that I would love it to do if it could do it. But does that stop me from using it? No. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like I'd love the ability to, use some of the files a bit nicer, or to like I really love the idea of high efficiency RAW. And I just really want to use that a bit more, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that I go, like this camera doesn't do this.
Oh, I'm so disappointed.
What's currently in your bag, like to go? Let's say, how many lenses and cameras do you take with you? Let's say on assignment.
Well, because I have so many bags, which is a problem.
So let's start.
Which
How
ones
many
at which
bags you
camera?
take, first of all, and then what's inside them.
Let's take the Norway trip, right? So from that perspective, I knew that I obviously had to take this lens.
Right.
So I knew that like long lens was covered, and me and Morten spoke before, and we basically had the idea that I'll bring this lens and he'll bring his 400, and we swapped those two. So I was in a situation where I could shoot 400 2.8 and I could also shoot 600 f4 at the same time, and which was nice. But it was camera body wise is a Z9 for sure. And then the rest is just batteries, especially if we're in a hide for 12 hours. Like, I just need batteries. Yeah. I did take a little Z30 with me. Like, a lot of the travel stuff was shot on Z30, which I really enjoy using. But that was about it. Whereas...
Just so curious, how do you... Because I've just gotten through editing yet another video on Z30. I know you're all very excited to see that. But we've spent quite a lot of time on the Z30. How do you have it set up? Do you have a little gimbal, or what do you
No, so I don't use a gimbal. Top tip, Nikon's electronic VR is really good if you use it the right way.
Right.
What is the right way?
All electronic VR, and this is the same if you look at electronic VR for like GoPro, like action cameras, when they use electronic VR, they need a fast shutter speed.
Right.
And that kind of goes against the grain of the traditional slow shutter speed in video.
For video, yeah.
So if you bump your shutter speed in, even with Nikon cameras or with any camera, your electronic VR becomes better because it finds it easier to figure out where the frame's moving.
I need to re-record that video now on vlogging for beginners.
So I've been pretty
1 hour
happy.
long video.
I've been pretty happy with what I get from Z30 with or without electronic VR. I've done both, and I've been pretty happy with that.
Do you think Z30 is underrated?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily underrated. I think that, I suppose the problem is that a lot of like our core audience already has other cameras. So it's like a secondary camera.
Yeah.
And I suppose you don't really necessarily get the people that are using this as like their first camera, because, core audience wise, they have a Z6, they have a Z7, they have a Z9, right?
Yeah.
But for new people and for people that are like, this might be their first camera, I think it's amazing. I've done a lot of training on Z30 to people that are new to Nikon, and it does some stuff that they wish that either other cameras do or they wish their phone did before.
Yeah.
And it just allows them to create stuff that they've never been able to create before, which
Yeah.
I think is is always that's the most important part, right?
Yeah, so maybe for our viewers or for our little community here, we don't necessarily see where the Z30 has its place, but it definitely does. And when
Sure.
I quite often get a lot of non-photography friends ask me, what camera should I buy now?
Yeah.
And it was always a tough one when the D3000, 5000 series sort of started to disappear. And it was like, oh, well, it's this, £1,200 Z50 kit, because that was all that was available. It was like, it's quite difficult to recommend that to people who have very limited interest in photography and just want something a bit better than what they've got. So the Z30 just fits into that slot quite nicely. So yeah, I hope that's helpful for people. Now, I was going to ask a question on Nikhil was asking what memory cards you use now. Are you still using Delkin Black?
Yeah, Delkin Black or Angelbird, generally the two brands that I use exclusively.
Excellent. And I mean, in terms of, so you're quite happy with your lens and camera. You've got Delkins in there right now. So we use those memory cards too.
325 is really good. Yeah.
So then in terms of lenses on your personal wish list, maybe that aren't on the roadmap, but
Sure.
like if you were going,
I really want a ultra wide prime.
Yes, I want an 18.
14, 18? Which one?
Even wider. I want a 12.
Wow.
Like a 12 or an 11. So one of the things is that I exclude.
No fisheye.
No.
Rectangle.
Rectilinear, not fisheye. So one of the things about my 14 to 24, I use that exclusively at 14.
Right.
Like it's always at 14. If I need to zoom in, I'm probably stood in the wrong place.
Right.
So I just love ultra wide landscapes.
Yeah.
And lots of foreground interest and just massive depth from my foreground to my background.
Yeah.
So that's why I love this kind of ultra wide. And I've been to so many places, especially recently, where I'm like, I need a 12 mil. I need an 11 mil or whatever it is. Absolutely not fisheye. And that's what I would love. I'd love it if there was like an ultra wide prime. Don't get me wrong. The 14 to 24 is so good, but for someone like me that doesn't use the rest of the 14 to 24,
Yeah.
I just need that prime. I think from a long lens point of view, I'm pretty much covered.
Yes, I think you're okay on those.
Yeah.
Well, I think the only what people say is 300 mil. That's something that people say, okay, you've got all those covered. Let's release a 300 mil.
I suppose the problem with the 300 mil is if you look at the last f mount lens, which is a 120 to 300 2.8, that lens is still relatively new. The 120 to 300 2.8 is so good.
Yes.
And you said it's basically better than 300 prime. Or is it on the same level? Yeah, something. Okay.
Yeah. The 120 to 300 was better than the 300 2.8 prime for sure.
Yeah.
So Nikon's in a position where like, well, that 120 to 300 is still so good and still does work well through the FTZ adapter.
It does. We did that whole Big Cat Sanctuary shoot on FTZs actually on Z mount, and the 120 to 300 was amazing. You fell in love with it then.
Oh yeah.
And the 180 to 400 was also amazing. I mean, it's a great.
And I think that lens is probably, I don't know, but that's maybe why there isn't been like a 300 2.8 yet, if that makes sense, because that lens is relatively only launched with the D6.
That's right, exactly. Do you still, I mean, in terms of D6, do you still see people coming on your workshops and stuff with D6s, or is it mainly? Yeah.
I mean, there's still people that want DSLRs, and there's still people that want some of the things that a D6 offers them, lower megapixel counts, for example. And the D6 is something that where did I recently send? My D6 has recently been sent to a photographer that works with aircraft.
Oh wow.
I don't know if I'll ever get that back. But
it'll have 2 million shutter actuations on it when it comes back.
But yeah, there's still people that want to use a D6. Obviously, like the market in general is, people are excited about Z9 and new Z lenses and things like that. But I still think there's a place for it.
Is D6 still the best camera in low light from Nikon in the Nikon lineup?
I think so. Yeah. Purely from just a physical standpoint. And when we say, I want to be really clear, because people get really confused when you say in low light, right?
Yeah.
So when we say in low light, I'm purely talking about ISO performance.
Yes.
Yeah. Because
So,
some people think that when you say in low light, you're talking about autofocus and other stuff. That's not the case. I'm just purely talking about ISO performance.
Yeah. I was going to say, I have had several photographers who had the D6 who bought a Z9 and said, no, I'm keeping my D6s because I shoot quite frequently at, 25,000 ISO, and actually my D6s still do the job for me for that. So they both.
And that's something that is like a common sense thing. You know, as good as the sensor in the Z9 is, it's also 45 megapixels.
Yes.
So that means that the pixels have to actually be a particular size.
Yep.
That means that if you compare them to a sensor that has a significant lower number of pixels, those pixels are going to be a different size. They're going to give you a different noise performance floor.
Right.
I have a question for you on that.
Sure.
So do you think there's still a place in Nikon lineup of Z cameras for a low resolution, very good low light, high ISO performance? Because you mentioned you like resolution yourself, but also obviously we're talking Z9 is 45 megapixels. Do you think we may see a camera, low resolution, fantastic low light performance?
So like, I'll answer that from like my opinion,
Yeah.
and then I'll kind of give you like a broader answer.
Yeah.
So like my opinion, what I used to do in like low light situations is I'd use a Z7 and a Z6. So my Z7 would be like my absolute go-to for everything that's landscapes and so on. And then as soon as it started to get a little bit dark, I'd go to a Z6 because the Z6 was better in low light. I don't do that with a Z9. I just use my Z9.
Right.
There's also the little caveat around depends on the editing software that you use
Yes. very
as to what your noise performance is. Don't just think that because you have a lots of noise in a particular piece of software that you'll automatically get the same amount of noise in another piece of software, because you don't.
Yes.
So the software that you use is really important. But from a wider spectrum, yeah, I still think there is a place for a lower megapixel camera that performs better at higher ISO. I don't know if that camera or how long that camera will be justifiable for, because software improves all the time.
That's true. And it gets more and more intelligent as things go along.
Sure.
Do you tend, because I use, and some people go, why haven't you decided to use Capture One yet? But I use Lightroom for all of my editing. I've just gotten so used to it now that I don't use anything else. However, when I was shooting with the Z9, I was like, I need to actually use something else for these files, for the high-res files, because it just, the noise was really unpleasing. Is that the right word?
Yeah, I mean,
It
each
wasn't like the Nikon software made there be less noise. It just looked better.
each software company has like their own reverse engineering of what they think a raw file should look like.
Yeah.
And that means that Capture One is going to give you a slightly different result to what Lightroom does, and what Lightroom does will be different to what Nikon software does. So it will, don't let that though make your life more difficult because you find Lightroom easier.
Yeah.
If Lightroom's easier, just use Lightroom.
Yeah.
Unless you've got a picture that really needs to be at the best quality it can be, then maybe you move to a different piece of software for whatever reason, but then you have that whole learning curve again, and you might not be able to use that software as effectively as you can use Lightroom.
Yeah.
So no one software is better or the other. I use a magnitude of different pieces of software depending on what I'm doing, right?
Fair enough. So you don't have like one magic software to rule them all. Find them.
No.
Microsoft Paint.
That's right.
I love Microsoft.
It's so underrated.
That's what I used to make this cover for this ice cream.
All right.
Why
Okay.
does that not surprise me?
So we've got just a couple more tiny questions. I have to say a massive thank you to Vince for your contribution
Thanks so
to
much.
the coffee fund, and said ultra wide prime, please, and a wide compact around 16 to 18, please.
Sure.
I love the idea of these compact lenses. I would also really love, because I do use DX, I would love a wide angle compact, like 12 to 24 or 10 to 24.
Sure.
I know there is a 12, was it 1228 or 26 on the...
That's DX.
1228 Pausum.
Yeah, but that worries me that it's got power 2 minutes. So I'm like, okay, something else. So I'm agreed with you there, Vince, for sure. And there was someone else who was asking a question that I need to find, because we have run over our usual hour.
Samantha is asking, have you heard anything on new flash gun releases at all?
Yeah.
Any development? No.
No, I think the only development we have around lighting is obviously that we decided to work a lot closer with other lighting brands.
Photo and Nissin.
So I think that's generally the way the market's going. I still think there is a place for Nikon speed lights, but I think the SB5000 does a fantastic job as it is already. For most people anyway, at least. And if you need more power than that, you probably need to go to a studio light anyway. So.
Yeah, I find the SB5000s are really good at what they do, but there is a limit to how much of a beating they can take.
Oh, for sure. Unless you
pro work.
want to use like 50 of them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah, I like SB900 because it's so bulky. It's overheats, but it's so bulky. It's just amazing.
it does take a lot of beating until it melts, and then
Yeah.
I've never seen it
Just
melt.
turn off that heat warning thing and it's fine, you know.
There was a couple of people saying, "Oh, I'd love a D2, like a Z2H, because obviously D2H at that
Well,
time."
that's what a
was-
lot of people think that Z8 is going to be mini Z9. That's where I think this comes from, that like a low res, high performance, and you got high res, etc., etc.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you look at like previous cameras, there's always been different iterations
Yeah.
of the same camera with a slightly different sensor, and that was, you know, that's been evident even if you look at like the D800 and D800E, where Nikon just tried to do different things with different sensors.
Yeah,
Yeah, and they got me. I bought the E version.
yeah, he was like straight in there. With
Yeah.
that
Extra
one.
300 pounds, you know.
And it's nice if you can do that, and if the R&D budget is there for that, and you have that capability. But also, I guess it's difficult because now there is such a platform for people to voice what they want all the time.
Yeah.
It must be so hard from a manufacturer's viewpoint to go, okay,
Sure.
we are going to concentrate on this, because they can't necessarily go on majority vote, because if you do, it looks like everybody wants all the things all the time.
Yeah,
right now.
everybody wants everything.
Yeah. Discuss democracy and
Yesterday.
socialism.
Yeah.
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 We're just so impatient.
But there, you know, there are actual channels that Nikon does use to really, I don't know if this is the right term, but to really kind of get rid of the noise and really focus in on what is important
Right.
and what people do really want in their cameras. And Nikon does spend a lot of time doing that.
You see, they don't read the comments on our channel. Is that not how they decide their next?
I read
next
the comments on it.
that's nice. I really feel sorry for you.
But that's the thing. We all has to settle a little bit in terms of like the amount of the anger that is just spilled on the internet is massive. And look, we all people, and we
Yes.
know things are gonna come out. So you know, let's be people.
Let's be zen
We're all
about it.
friends here.
That's
yeah.
right. This is a safe space. Yeah, because there's lots of, there's like, oh, I would like this number of megapixels or this number of megapixels. Are you, Matt Owens talked about it with us a few times, and this is like from your not Nikon hat, shall we say?
Sure.
But like, what would you think about the idea of having medium format lenses on a Z body? Do you think that would be a
I
problem?
don't. I suppose the problem is that you're getting even more and more smaller market.
Right.
I mean, obviously, the counter argument is that if more people did it, the market would be bigger.
Yeah.
But at the moment, medium format is, at least mirrorless medium format, is such a small market.
It is. It's true.
And would you have to have a separate just system in terms of lenses as well?
Yeah, you'd have to have like you have DX and FX lenses. You'd have to have medium format lenses, otherwise the focal lengths would be out.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, there is one thing that I do like talking about, which is kind of in the same idea, which is we're starting to add too many megapixels to full frame sensors.
Right.
So diffraction exists, and currently diffraction on 45 megapixel sensors really starts to become visible past f11.
Yeah.
If you get to 60, diffraction starts to become visible around about f8.
Right.
And if you start getting to 100, diffraction starts to kick in at 5.6. So a 100 megapixel camera that you might think sounds amazing for landscape photographers is pointless.
Yeah.
Because you can't shoot it at f8 or f11.
Right.
And it's just going to be soft. So we would either have to stack everything. If there was a 100 megapixel camera, you'd have to stack everything, because you wouldn't be able to shoot at f8 or f11. It would just be diffraction everywhere. So the only way around that, obviously there are cameras with 100 megapixels, but there's no full frame.
No, not yet.
That's like out that you can go and buy.
Yeah.
So there's medium format.
Yeah, GFX,
Yeah.
H2S.
And because medium format's a larger surface area, diffraction then kicks in at slightly later aperture. So yeah, I think like 45 megapixels is the absolute sweet spot.
So that's a fine balance. Yeah, because
Interesting.
you've mentioned you like resolution. So
Yeah.
so you think 45 is a sweet spot.
100%.
Okay.
Like if you go further, you start to then put yourself into a position where diffraction starts to creep in, other things start to happen like noise and so on. So, and I think that Nikon are aware of that. They didn't just choose 45 megapixels out of nowhere.
No.
Is there like some sort of software solution for that?
I mean, obviously Nikon cameras have diffraction countering methods. Like you can turn it on and off. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But diffraction happens. It's physics, right? If you wanted to talk about the circle of confusion and so on, then you can do. But I think at some point there'll be some level of software that you could do to fix that, or something you could do, or something that's in the cameras or in the lenses to compensate for that. But right now, diffraction happens.
Yeah.
Well, we have pixel shift on some
Sure.
cameras, so I guess that's the one way to do it. But obviously, it's very limited to what it can do. Obviously, you can't do street photography with that.
No,
Or something
and
like
I can't go and use my 10-stop ND filter and shoot a 300-second long exposure that's pixel shift with clouds rolling through it. Like there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And then if I can't stack it in camera, I have to then go and like stack it on a computer, and that's not what I want to do as a landscape photographer for sure.
No.
I would much rather just shoot a long exposure and see it on the back of the camera.
Yeah.
So that's, photography is changing all the time.
That's true.
There's one thing that I'm not going to read. Oh, there's so many comments. It's actually really lovely to see all your comments and the conversation that's happening. And I think I'm going to have to go through and read them all afterwards. One thing that we talked about, I think last week, was the idea of having a focus stacking capability. Because obviously we have focus shift shooting in camera. But it would be quite nice to have that result in a picture, even if it was a JPEG.
Oh, in camera.
In camera.
Yeah.
Because I think that would be kind of
So
cool.
phone functionality kind of in
Yeah, so like,
camera,
yeah.
I think that would you use that? Probably not, because
No.
No, but
I just love raw files. That's the only problem.
No, but that's the thing. I think the idea is obviously like the pros will stay pros. They will get as much manual control as possible. But then you may want to have this feature for people coming from the phones. You know, so
And
not only, but yeah.
simplified. So you have this automated feature in the camera for people who want to use it. Like let's say we have now HDR functionality, which creates a JPEG, it's not a raw file.
And it's a really good point, because we're seeing that happen more and more. We get lots of situations where people go, my phone took this picture and my camera took this picture and my phone looks a lot better.
Yeah.
But what people don't understand is that picture is like made up of like 15 different pictures that have all been computed together into one final shot.
Yeah.
And the idea of what your camera gives you is that I want all of that flexibility for me to go and do that myself. That's the whole, I love shooting raw because I love being able to edit the highlights and increase the shadows and whatever.
Yeah.
And if you start adding that kind of automatic feature that you get in a phone into a camera, do you start losing that aspect of it? Because
definitely it wouldn't be as good as if you do it yourself, like using Helicon or something like that for focus stacking or for HDR or anything like that. But I find it kind of interesting that it's almost like comparing it to audio. You have your people who will buy LPs, I'm looking at you, and will have a beautiful thousands of pounds hi-fi setup, and then you'll have people who'll be like, I'll just stream it on Spotify and whatever, it's an MP3, and it sounds completely different. But
I suppose the biggest separation of not enthusiast really, like the biggest separation of beginner to professional has always been development.
Yeah.
So like even with film, right? If you were a pro, you developed your own film.
Yeah.
Whether it was in your bathroom or in whatever, you developed your own film.
Yeah.
If you were a beginner, you sent it to Boots or wherever, right, to get your film developed. We moved to digital. Your phone edits it for you, or you edit it in software, right?
That's a good analogy.
Like, I feel like that has always been a part of photography, and it's always been a part of photography for me. So I wouldn't want something to take that out of my hands.
Yeah, but don't you think we should have both? Because obviously in a shrinking market, which has been shrinking for a long time, that would bring more people in. But as long as you have both things, automated and full manual, then you can increase your audience effectively as a...
Yeah, I mean, convenience is always going to be king.
Yeah.
If something can happen faster, then that's always going to be the way to go, right? But at the same time, I feel like that starts to maybe take away from what photography is.
Well, that's true. It's an interesting debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because there's so many points. What I'm thinking is actually we should get you out.
Just talk about them.
Yeah, and no, I think we should just go out, give you a film camera,
See what happens.
a nice portrait, and just
They'll all
here
be
you go,
really close-up pictures of you.
with a fisheye lens.
Right. Well, we are gonna. The chat is fantastic. Someone said, ignoring the chat. We've got so much to talk about, and also, yes, we do enjoy just chatting to Ricci. We don't see him very often, so if you have specific questions, Ricci also has a channel on which you can post comments and questions. He may or may not answer them there.
I'll try.
And also, obviously, we have the Nikon School, which is this incredible resource that we're very, very fortunate to have in our region, where you can actually book some time with these good people like Ricci and Neil, and they will be able to help you with your photography exploits. You do online courses as well, right? So
Yeah, they're not just in person.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest things that we did. So when we were in a situation where everyone was in lockdown, we started doing online stuff, and we continue to do that.
Yeah.
And there's lots of people, I know, even some of your viewers, that would have also seen some of the stuff that other regions did online as well. They're still doing that as well. So Nikon is very keen on education, and even way more so than I think any other brand. And I'm trying to say that from the most honest point of view I can. Like, education is something that Nikon is incredibly keen about. That's literally why my job exists.
Yeah.
So there are loads of different ways that you can always learn about what Nikon is doing, or how to use whatever you're using from Nikon stuff, wherever it is.
Well, actually, what's kind of interesting is I put together a sort of really basics of photography for people starting to work for us. So if they had come from a sales background and didn't have a photography background, they could learn just the real basic, what's ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Most of that information I got from the Nikon website, because Nikon have always, over the years, even before Nikon School existed, had this kind of resource. I remember there was one video I watched, and I was like, I recognize this chap. It was Joe McNally teaching people how to use built-in flash.
Yeah.
And the video was probably done about 10 years ago, before, YouTube tutorials were really a thing. But he was there explaining how to get the most out of your built-in flash on like a D3100 or something. And that, I think that's one of their really strong points, that maybe all the talk about gear is fantastic, and it's a healthy discussion that we have every single week.
It's not healthy.
It's
every single week is not healthy.
But it's but I think that we never want to completely separate that out from the photography, which is the important thing.
Yeah. There's no point buying a new camera if you don't know how to use it.
Exactly that.
That's the point.
So anyway,
and you'd be surprised how things change over time without even realizing.
yeah.
So something that you did how many ever years ago, or even months ago, might not be the same now.
Yeah.
Because stuff changes.
Yes.
And that's what makes my life, no, I was going to say miserable, but it's not miserable. But that's what makes my life difficult, is that there are situations where things can change.
No, didn't unplug my phone either. I forgot to unplug the phone before we started. It's very, very true. And, we also get people who shot film or early digital. Yeah. And now they pick up a Z camera and they go, oh, I don't know how this works.
For the longest time, and Nikon knew this. Nikon knew this before they launched the D800. Nikon knew that when they launched the D800, they were going to get so many people that didn't know how to use it, because they'd never shot anything that's that high a megapixel. And that's exactly what happened. There were so many people that thought the D800 has all these megapixels and it's just soft. And it wasn't that it was soft. It was just obviously the first time, especially for a lot of people, that they've really encountered fine motion blur. Yeah. And that fine motion blur can really, really annoy you sometimes, because it's like, is that missed focus? Is it in focus? It might be perfectly in focus, but your shutter speed was just slightly too slow. Yeah. And it's not sharp. Yeah. That happens.
I remember there was a manual download and also supplementary guide how to shoot with this camera. It was a separate thing, and it was about 100 pages long.
Yeah, and I think that now, because there's so much that goes into these cameras, and that's why we talked about on the podcast the other day, there's a whole extra manual now for the new firmware update, so that you can learn how to use. Yeah,
I mean, like, if you go back to one of the questions we had earlier, I can't remember if I said this point or not, but there's a point in at least what I'm in teaching, is that there's a difference, a very, very clear difference between 3D tracking and 3D tracking with subject detection. And not everybody understands that difference. And that's why we're getting some people that aren't quite understanding when they should be using 3D tracking and when they shouldn't. So much so that, like, I don't use 3D tracking. I'll only use 3D tracking if I'm in a situation where I can use 3D tracking and subject detection. Yeah. There's a difference. Yeah. So, and some people don't always understand that, because they think that 3D is 3D, whether you ask it to look at a subject or not, and it's not the same.
Yes, and that's something that Andy was saying, like 3D tracking on the D6 is completely different to 3D tracking on the Z9. It's two different pieces of technology. It's got the same name. It does. Yeah.
But even in the Z9, like, the 3D tracking with subject detection off is different to 3D tracking with subject detection turned on.
Yes. Andy suggests he said we desperately need, but I'm saying suggest because I'm paraphrasing, a how-to AF guide from Nikon or MPS that are on the new firmware version, not covered in because we have a new guide on all the firmware.
Yeah, there's obviously the new firmware manual, right? But I suppose that's more of a tell rather than a how.
Yeah. Could do an autofocus.
Yeah.
Could write a book. And make millions.
I'll tell you one thing right now. I will never write a book.
Okay.
It's just not something I'd ever be able to do.
Okay.
I just don't have the attention span. But an hour-long video, I could make that.
Yeah, you could.
So
are you going to do a kind of update of your autofocus for Z's video, do you think?
Yeah, I suppose the biggest problem is that I desperately wanted to do one for Z9, but because Z9 firmware updates we know about the firmware updates so far in advance, I was kind of like, well,
you need to hold on.
There's no point me making this video and then like a couple of months later it's just out of date, if that makes sense. Because the amount of effort that it takes to kind of put that together, especially for like the Z6 and Z7, it kind of still has some still relevancy. Whereas with the Z9, if you were to make a video on firmware version 1 or 2, it's now kind of almost not relevant.
That's right.
Especially with all the new areas and all the new options. So that does mean it's a little bit difficult. But
yes,
I think now would probably be, now would probably be a good time.
Yeah.
So for those who are asking to explain about 3D tracking, if you have a big question on, like if you really want to understand the ins and outs, Ricci did an amazing video on the Z autofocus system.
Doesn't cover 3D tracking.
It doesn't?
No, because I made that before Z9. That's the only problem. Yeah, I'd have to make a new one.
I think we're forcing you into having to do a new video.
I'll try.
But like the feeling I have with all this path that Nikon took with Z9 updates, because we have version 3.0 and there's been a huge step between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3, etc. etc. It seems to me that with this firmware, Nikon is building up the foundation that will go into all other cameras because the changes are so drastic. And obviously the camera is so powerful, the processor is so powerful that can handle all that thing, that this all will eventually trickle down to, cheaper cameras.
Yeah, I mean, there's the idea that, this obviously didn't happen. Yeah. But let's say, for example, that Z9 didn't launch when it did. What if Z9 launched later down the line and then it didn't actually have any firmware updates, but it just had everything that was built into it? So there has to be a point where, you either launch something and you launch it as good as it's ever going to be, or you launch it and it's still obviously an amazing product, but then actually, you do more research and development down the line, and then you can start to add new features back in. And I think that just increases the life of a product.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
And also perception from people, no?
Yeah, I think that launching the products is better than not launching the products, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Richard is asking what the difference is between 3D tracking and 3D tracking with subject detection.
Very brief, simple.
In 3 words.
Yeah, in 3 words. They're different.
It's 10 p.m. and we still...
So the key thing is that when you're using 3D tracking without subject detection, it's not actively looking for anything. Yeah. So it's not looking for an eye, a face, a torso, a headlight, a car, whatever, right? And one of the things that I always get is, how do I get a bird that's perched and then it flies off? And how do I get every one of those shots in focus? That was actually a question that Morton asked. So, and I get this all the time, especially from a lot of wildlife photographers. So if I'm in 3D tracking doesn't know that that's a bird if I've got subject detection turned off. So all it's looking at is like texture, color, patterns, those types of things, right? Now, if that moves and it just so happens that there's a texture or a pattern that's similar, does it necessarily mean that 3D tracking is going to go with that subject? Not necessarily, unless that subject really stands out. And that's the way that 3D tracking worked in D5 and D6.
Right.
Unless you had the 3D tracking face priority on, but that only worked for faces, obviously. It didn't work for birds and stuff. But when you have 3D tracking with subject detection turned on, and the real clear point is that just because you have subject detection turned on doesn't mean it's using subject detection. So in those situations, if 3D tracking knows that it's a bird, it will generally stick to it much better than if it doesn't know that it's a bird. And whether it knows it's a bird or not comes down to things like distance, comes down to the lens you're using, the situation you're in, all those types of things. But there are times where my camera won't know that it's a bird, and I'll then go to a different mode.
Right.
So I might go to a different area to either make the area smaller to get the camera to say that's the subject I want. Or if it does know that it's a bird, then I can stay where I am. Yeah. So don't think that just because you have subject detection turned on that you're using subject detection. You're only using subject detection as soon as it actually recognizes that subject, which it does most of the time.
Yeah.
But there will be situations where the subject is too far away, or the subject is covered or hidden by things.
Right.
And then what does it do? It defaults to traditional 3D. And that basically means that you've turned subject detection off, even though you haven't. It's just not using it until it recognizes a subject that it knows to be a recognizable subject.
Right. So, Richard, I hope that answers your question. That was more than 3 words,
Sorry.
I'd say. No,
3 hours later.
That was a great, great explanation. Vahan asked if you could say the word Nikon instead of Nikon.
No. That
He draws a line.
actually hurts me.
But when or if you move to United States,
I would still say Nikon.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's how it's supposed to be.
And Z.
and what I want to point out to American folks who want to, let's say, hang out with Ricci online, then obviously you can book yourself in for Nikon School course online. So
Yes.
yeah, you don't need to be in UK for that.
Yeah. So,
I want my cut.
Yeah.
or you can come over and then you can hang out with him in
That's
person.
true. That's
go,
true. And
go
come
to-
here as well.
Trust me, that's a long way to go to be disappointed.
I doubt it.
No refunds.
Now, there are a couple of other remaining questions, but I mean, we've been going for an hour.
Yeah,
and a
we're drawing a
half,
line. Yeah.
And I don't know about you.
I'm fine. I can just answer questions all day.
We need
this
some
is
likes, guys.
This is my job.
That is true. One thing I will say is that that we do need about 200 less likes than we have viewers, which is shocking. You should definitely give it a like.
Looks like I'm not making any more videos.
Even if you don't like it, just like it anyway. There were a couple of other bits and pieces, like have you shot with other cameras? Have you shot with other brands?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is something that sometimes either surprises people or some people just don't expect. I use other brands all the time. So
Outrageous.
but
And I think people need to understand as well the same about us.
Yes.
Yeah. So
We're
mean,
usually not very private.
it's not like I go out and actively shoot with other stuff like as like a work basis, if that makes sense. But it is always good to know what other people are doing.
yeah, because
You know?
you photographers, we're curious,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have many friends in the photography industry, so it's easy to see what other cameras are doing.
Yeah, I think Vahan was actually asking if you'd shot with oh goodness, where is it? With R3.
Yeah.
R3?
Yeah.
He said, if so, is the Z9 equal to or behind when it comes to tracking?
I suppose the biggest problem for me is that there's been a lot of firmware updates since I last saw the R3,
Right.
and since I spent some time with it. So I don't know. I wouldn't like to comment on how their firmware updates have changed. I know how we have. There's definitely things that I like, and there's things that I don't like, and yeah.
Yeah. Good. There was someone it was actually Sam was asking about film cameras. I think I know the answer to this. But do you think Nikon will ever make another film camera? In your personal, humble opinion?
In my personal opinion, I'm not sure. It'd take a massive market swing for that to be the case.
Keep buying those second-hand ones and lots of film, and then hopefully that will lead somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that the question about whether or not they would make a film camera with a Z mount is that there's not really a point because film is the size that it is, and what is the point in putting a Z lens on a...
I think that's the problem, isn't it? If you
35
release
mil.
film camera, then you don't have new lenses to sell with it, and you want to have that.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, I would specifically want to use older lenses on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to use Z lenses on a
then
film camera.
If you see what I mean, as a business, you don't release a camera and then you don't have lenses to sell because they're all second-hand. You don't make profit of this.
I suppose I'd like, and this is just my personal opinion, for me to shoot film, it would be because of the nostalgia, first of all, but also because of the creative intent that, not everything's perfect.
Yeah.
It looks like it's been shot on film and it gives you more character. So then why would I want to put a surgical grade lens on the front of it? I'd want to put like an older lens that flares or, vignettes.
Has some character.
We need reissues. Release the film camera and then reissue some classic lenses. That would be cool.
Reissue the 55 1.2.
Yeah, the knocked ones.
Do you not have any of those?
We do.
I thought you might. Yeah.
In fact, we were shooting recently with the Voigtlander 58-1.4,
Right.
and I put it against my 55 1.2 because
Sure.
that's my favorite go-to lens. And it's interesting to see how those old optics work on Z bodies. They actually, because I don't have a DSLR anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys are aware of this because you get a lot of people from the film industry that come and ask for older F-mount stuff, right? So, yeah, the film industry is actually really interested in older Nikon or Nikkor lenses.
That's right. It's partly because of the consistency of the look of the lenses, but also the coatings. and the fact that they do produce this certain character that you don't get with sort of clinical newer cine lenses. So if you're going for, particularly if you're going to shoot on film, I mean actual film,
Like, you mean
cine film.
Cine film, so Vision 3,
Yeah,
250D,
exactly.
500T. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's cinema lenses out there that you can buy in different versions, from soft to sharp, depending on the character that you want. So,
True.
you know, it's not like photography lenses, and it's not like the same mentality as photography where everything has to be.
super.
We had some guys from the United States buying lenses from us, rehousing them
Yeah.
to proper rigs, and then charging 20 times more what
Yeah,
they paid
that
for
happens.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, and in that selection has been things like a Noct, the original 58mm Noct. We've had 55 macros.
There was a company that rehoused 70 to 200s.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
To make them parfocal and to make them
Oh, I
obviously
see.
have all the gears on the outside of them. So
Wow, interesting.
it happens a lot.
That's cool.
That's very, very cool. Dave asked, what's your favorite subject to talk about?
Me personally.
Film photography, yeah.
No. It probably is photography, as sad as that is, or dinosaurs. Dinosaurs, yeah.
Little paleontologists.
I am indeed. That's what I wanted to be.
Me
And
too, when I was 6.
I wanted to be a paleontologist.
We should go and photograph some fossils then.
We should.
What, dinosaurs aren't real? I'd also like to know, I've never used it, but I've got loads of Atomos footage of Z9 subject detecting dinosaurs.
Really?
Yeah.
So we need
And it
a
works.
time machine
It works.
so that we can go back. Well,
Yeah.
I think actually probably natural history museums are the best place for that.
They didn't move very fast. but-
No.
They should put in feature of Z9, dinosaur recognition. You know, it's a separate thing, you know.
Be really, really useful for all those, wildlife dinosaur photographers.
Yeah, there's a lot out there.
There's so many. It's so interesting. Yes, there was a couple of people were saying, please give the stream more likes. We like the likes, but yes, it is important for the content creation and for YouTube, because then they like us too. And they think that we do a good job. I think that's the general
That
idea.
helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever use, do you have any manual focus Nikon lenses yourself?
I've got a 58 Noct.
Oh. It's got to go extra.
You mean the Z one?
Yeah.
Nice.
No, so for Nikon lenses, not that much. I have a, I can't remember the name of it. You know, the 40?
Yeah, the 45 pancake.
Yeah.
The
little
2.8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Is it on an FM3A?
no, it's not. No, I don't have a body to put it on.
Is it silver or black?
It's black.
Black one is more
Ooh,
expensive.
rare.
Yeah, because you have lots of silvers.
Yes,
Yeah,
usually.
yeah,
Yeah, with the camera, there were more silver cameras than there were.
they were. Yeah,
We bought the last stock in UK. Nikon found them in the warehouse. They called us. We've got, 200 units or
Yeah,
something?
like that.
We'll
Okay,
take them.
and we just took them all.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
But I do have a lot of older manual focus lenses from other brands. I've got a large quantity of OM stuff.
Is there anything that you adapt to put on the Zs?
No, I suppose the problem is that I just don't need to. Which
I
is
just don't need to.
It's like just some bragging rights.
yeah.
I don't really need.
I don't want that to sound as bad as it sounds, but I just they kind of just sit on a shelf.
Look pretty in your display
Yeah.
case,
Yeah,
like a trophy cabinet.
that's
but
kind
with
of the.
cameras.
I suppose that's kind of the sad thing, unfortunately. But
Yeah. Ramesh was asking if Nikon would bring out an adapter to use the old D lenses with autofocus. I mean, I think that
I think if that was going to happen, it would have already happened by now.
yeah, and I
It's been
think
a while.
cost-wise, that's probably not.
I
It's
suppose
not cost
the
effective.
biggest problem as well is, especially if you look at Z being about like the highest quality, higher megapixels, there are a lot of D series lenses that just couldn't give you the resolution and detail that you would want,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
But from another point of view, a lot of people say that Z mount is pretty much universal mount for
Everything.
adapting lenses.
Yeah.
And if you look at Facebook groups, then there's a lot of groups that are using non-Nikon glass, or could be even Soviet glass, and all the OM, etc., etc. The same for medium format like GFX. So there is a kind of a group of people who do want to adapt the lenses for Nikon cameras. So from that point, do you think it makes sense or not?
I mean, as long as you know that lens isn't going to give you like the best results.
Yeah,
in the
they're not
world,
going for clinical perfection, I think. Yeah.
Then yeah, absolutely. It's more of the, like we talked about earlier, so the creative aspect of photography. So
Yes, exactly that. It's about the creativity when you do things like that. Last question of the day. Roger said, is there any chance you'll do a US tour? Do you think, rather than moving, go and tour in the US?
I'd love to. Whether or not Nikon US would want to do that, I don't know. Maybe.
Rent a massive coach. Just go from East Coast to West
We'll
Coast.
come with you.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll do
exactly.
a tour.
Book the stadiums,
That's right.
Because obviously there's so many places I'd love to shoot in the US. Unfortunately, I've not spent a massive amount of time in the United States. I've only ever been to a couple of states. So I am desperate to shoot in places like Yellowstone, the Great Lakes,
For sure.
Death Valley.
I'd love to go to Yosemite.
Yeah.
It's like, definitely.
All of those
top my
places are places that I'd love to visit, and also like Canada as well. But it's, I don't know. You might be surprised to hear that there isn't necessarily like a channel of conversation between different regions.
Yeah.
Like Nikon Northern Europe talks to Europe a lot, but we don't really talk to like the US, or we don't really talk to other regions a lot. But as the world gets smaller, that can change. So you never know.
For sure. I think that's the consensus. If anyone from Nikon USA is watching, then what you should do is hire us a tour bus, and then we'll all come over and we'll do this grand tour. We should call it the grand tour.
I'll only go if our tour guide can be Seth.
Yeah,
Exactly.
We have to
That's
get
it,
Seth in there so we can do it. We've talked for over an hour and a half, and we thank you all very much for being with us this afternoon. Some people have left because they're like, I'm sorry, I forgot to pick up my wife.
I normally. I think this is
The kids are still at school. So.
I know. It's like, oh my God.
Was it the longest live stream to date?
I think it's the longest live stream to date.
I apologise.
No, we're very, very happy to have you here. You can come anytime.
We'll go for 2 hours next time.
That's right. Next one will break another world record. As I say, please feel free to continue to pop your questions in the comments afterwards. We will answer any that we can. And that's it really, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you very much for being here. You all. Thank you, Ricci. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Yay, thank you very much.
Been a pleasure.
Have a lovely weekend all. I can't end the stream. You can.
I'm going to hit it now. Bye-bye.
Bye.